I will. Hey guys, welcome to a fun interview today. I'm going to actually deep dive with Lorenzo. I'm going to ask the questions. He's going to answer the questions, but I want to really understand. I'm curious personally to understand all I can about his research thinking methodology. It's something that he thinks a lot about. And so we thought we'd just record this session and I'd ask a bunch of questions. And what we'd like you to do is add your own questions as you're listening to the interview, and then he can respond to it. Or we can even set up a follow-up recording as well to answer them in more detail. So, Lorenzo, thank you for taking the time today. I
I'm
appreciate.
excited about this, of course.
So we're going to talk all today's episode or interview is going to be all about research, uh, something that you know a lot about and something that I know nothing about. So let me just cut to it. And my first question is, when you start working with a new client, this is someone who's reached out to you and you don't know much about their business, you're getting started with the process. What is the first thing you do in terms of research?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The first thing I do is actually getting a perspective on a bunch of things, which I'll explain from I would say the main person that I will be working with from a client side, because usually is the person that is hiring me because has the problem. But not just, I don't limit myself with just getting the perspective from that person. I also want to understand the perspective from other people within the team. It doesn't really need to be necessarily marketing. It could be like, maybe they have like it's an e-commerce that has a product team. And when I talk about perspective, I mainly mean I have a bunch of questions that I usually ask, and in a survey format. And those questions are really like tailored at the client level, because oftentimes it wouldn't make sense to have one sort of questions that is templatized for each client, because each business is different. And those questions usually have one main goal. Understand the perspective of the entire business and the customer, from the business standpoint, from multiple people within the business. But the second thing is also like learn as much as possible from their perspective for myself, because these people are people that hopefully talk to customers every day. I'm a huge fan of asking to the person that deals with customer support to fill out that survey, because their job 40 hours a week is having conversations with customers. So understanding their perspective is very critical. One thing that I forgot to mention is that in that survey list that I also that I sent to the client, I also want to make sure that the goals of the scope are very clear. So obviously previously would have like calls and so on, but I want to hear from their perspective, real clear words saying, okay, what are you trying to achieve with this project? And what does the success of the project look like? Because now the answers of those two things help me focus on certain areas, versus not having those clear at all.
Actually that's a really good point. It's something that I never do when I'm working with clients, and I think it's so important to kind of get that expectation up front because it creates alignment. So just to recap, what you're saying is that when you start working with a new client, the first thing you're doing is you're creating a personalized questionnaire that you are then sending to your multiple people.
Main point of contact.
Main point of contact.
I asked the main point of contact to disseminate the same survey to different people, right? Could be like other people in the marketing team, maybe the founder or the co-founder, the CEO, whatever. And then maybe like the product team and the customer support team. Obviously, not always people are happy to like, spend 20 minutes because it's a list of bunch of questions. So not all the time I get the reply from multiple people, but already getting different perspective from like 2-3 people would be already valuable.
Okay. And then how much time does it take you to create this survey? You said it's personalized. I mean, is it something that takes 30 minutes to construct, or does it take much longer than that?
Probably less, like 20 minutes, depending on the business. And also depending on how much I know about the industry as well. So for example, if it's an industry that I know zero about because I've never worked with a client in that industry, happened to me recently actually, with a client in the wedding industry, and zero knowledge, because I have never bought anything, because I'm not married either, so I've never even been a customer of that kind of business. So I had to like self-educate myself like big time.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So so before you even start doing research, you're basically just trying to gather. Well, this is a form of research, but you're not. It's you haven't got to the core of it. You're getting information from the client up front, and this makes sense, because what I find is that the client motivation level and excitement is the highest at the start of the project. So this is a time to kind of like just get as much nuggets as you can, because once the project starts, it's impossible to get them to give up information.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is that sometimes, let's say, oh, what's the company number one goal in the next, maybe like 6 months? I get different responses from different people. So what I do is, usually after that first, round of responses, I get on the phone with a client and I actually like ask follow-up questions, because oftentimes either those responses are different from different people. So I want to understand like, okay, what's really the goal here?
Are these anonymous responses, or
No, no,
no?
no, no. No.
Okay, so you would then go back to your main point of contact and say, hey, look, someone from your product team has said that this is the goal.
Well, no, I would be like, look, different people have had different answers about X. What's your priority, since you're the person that has the problem, right?
Okay, yeah, no, I totally agree with this approach. Next question is, how do you so you've started the work now, and you've got all this input, you've got access to their systems, you've got tools that you can use, plug in. How do I mean, you're a one-man show. How do you prioritize what to focus on with the research?
Yeah, so let's talk about like usually the main point, like data points that I tend to collect. Not all the times. It really depends on on the scope and the level of the scope, the client as well. Data point number one is definitely like asking post-purchase survey questions to customers of the client. Another one would be on-site surveys. So simply like asking visitors a bunch of questions. Reviews mining, which I'm a huge fan of, doesn't really always happen, because if we're talking about an e-com of 10,000 products, doesn't really make sense to do reviews mining for those products, even for the best sellers, because usually it's like there's like a long tail sort of revenue, right? So that it wouldn't really make sense to do it. Sometimes if there's like a client that usually has is a big fan of research, I do customer interviews. They take a little bit longer time, but is actually one of my favorite data points. So, and then a couple of others that I collect are customer support tickets and live chat, conversations. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, those are direct conversations between an employee of the client and the customers. And then what I do is I collect all this data, and then what I do is I basically try to understand what are the most common problems that are being raised by all these different data points, and how many of these data points have a specific problem. So let's say, for example, I'll give you a practical example. Let's say we're I'm working with a client that that sells shoes. And I find from customer support tickets, from surveys, and maybe from customer interviews that the most critical problems that these people have is that they couldn't figure out the size of their shoes on the product page, right? So now I can't find the right size that fits my feet as the main problem, right? And that comes from 3 different data points. And then there's another problem, which is like, oh, I would love to see the images of the shoes on a person rather than simply see a photo of a shoes, because I want to see, how that model looks like with the shoe on. And that feedback, that problem comes from only one data source. Well, now I have 2 different problems, one with 3 different data points. So that comes on the top of when it comes to like priority, while the second one is, it comes only from one data source. Maybe like not a lot of people have mentioned it. So that goes at the bottom of the priority list.
Let me ask you kind of a correlated question to this. You talked about the size from 3 data sources. It came that size was an issue. So you go to the client says, this is great. And then do you also then get involved in, I mean, I'm going a little, I want to kind of just explore this further. Do you also then get involved in testing and validating that research piece?
Yeah. So the research is the step one of, okay, we need to understand the problem. And then that problem can be tackled in like, hundreds of ways.
Yeah.
From like very simple and fast ways to like more complicated ways, which could even like affect other departments, right? And a lot of times, one thing that I forgot to mention is that I also want to make sure that the client cares about solving that problem, right? Yeah. Because if the client doesn't care of solving that problem because maybe like it's too expensive or that is not a priority for the client at the moment, I don't prioritize it on the top, but that goes to the bottom. So research is the beginning, I would say, of the scope most of the times. And then, as I said, there's a lot of different ways to solve the size problem, for example, in this case. So I come up with a bunch of ideas on how that problem can be tackled.
Very good. Very good.
Then and obviously, like if it's an A/B testing scope, it would be like an experiment or multiple experiments to try to solve that problem. But oftentimes, those problems need to be also addressed from different departments, which don't really require testing. So maybe like it's a problem about a product. So now, okay, maybe like there's, I don't know, it's an ingredient that people are saying that is not good enough. Yeah, sure, we can think about some experimentation around testing a new ingredient, but that requires like a crazy amount of work and other stuff besides Lorenzo's work, right?
So that's a really good question. So if your research comes up with, well, it leads to another question, which is that if your research comes up with something that is being addressed by someone else, maybe in the product team or whatever it is, it's not a classical A/B test, then do you run into issues where you have to then attribute, like, how do we know that we solve this problem?
Yeah, so I would say it depends on the maturity of the client in terms of like testing and also if they have like, let's say, I'm working with a client that sells skincare products and they're truly passionate, not passionate is not the right word, but they truly understand the value of experimentation and CRO and so on. Maybe I could pitch them and propose them the idea of like, okay, let's experiment on different ingredients that maybe, don't have that issue, right? Maybe I talk to the product team or the sourcing team and so on. But obviously that is less common because, finding a person that is so open-minded to even like experiment on the ingredients on the product through a scientific way, because also it requires some changes from a logistic standpoint, right? It's not very common, and sometimes it's also like a lot of work and a lot of cost, right? So that's why.
Okay, makes sense. I'm curious to know about the time dimension. So, you know, we're in an industry that's been evolving very rapidly, and I want to know your personal perspective on this, but I also want to understand the maturity of the space itself. How do you think differently about research today versus 5 years ago? Where were we 5 years ago? Where are we today? How's your perspective changed?
Yeah, so 5 years ago, I think I had a different concept, like I had a different perspective around research. And I think it was definitely a biased opinion around it. And I think because I didn't know how to do it correctly back then, I would say at the beginning of my work, I was even like, the type of questions I would be asking were not proper. I think back then I wasn't really going super deep into the problems. I would mainly like focus on the surface of the problem. Also, the other thing is like, okay, what's the truly impact of the problem, not just from the business standpoint, but even from the customer standpoint. So for example, um, you know, ordering the wrong size of shoes, right, requires a lot of additional pain points that the customer has once the person receives the shoes in the house, tries the shoes on. After that, there's a bunch of problems that the person has to deal with, right? Now they have to figure out, okay, I need to return the shoes. Like, how does that even work? I don't even know that, right? And maybe that person has had very bad experience with returning other products in the past. So now there's a bunch of other stuff, like even like, oh, they're not sleeping at night because the day after they have to do a bunch of stuff. They have to go to FedEx in the morning before dropping off the kids. So the true impact of a lot of different problems before I've never even thought about. Now, that I have experienced being much closer to the customer and truly like, pushing the finger in the wound of the problem, it makes me truly develop empathy and truly understand what these people have to deal with every day.
What about the industry? I mean, I think I have an idea about this, but like, just to give some context, I mean, 5 years ago, I didn't think people would, especially in our space, in the optimization space, there was not much discussion around research. Now, this is, of course, much more taken much more seriously. Do you feel the maturity of like just the seriousness with which the companies are looking at research and maybe agencies are looking at research has changed a lot in the last 5 years?
Maybe a little bit. I think it's also like because there's a lot of people out there that they talk about it, and the amount of content that was present 5 years ago versus now, if we look at the curve on like number of videos on YouTube or like podcasts or articles around anything, not just research. So now there's more supply. Obviously, not all the supply that is out there is good, but because there's more supply, there's more hopefully education around that, good or bad, whatever. So then, like think about the amount of content there's about any topic. You and I spoke about this before. I have a strong opinion about going to university. Like, let's say you want to go to university about marketing. Well, you might be better off going on YouTube and learning from a bunch of videos on YouTube than going to university, right? So obviously there's more education around research because there's also a lot of more content around that.
Yeah, and I mean, my sense is, and I'd like to know your perspective. I mean, my sense is that we're still in infancy stage of really
Yeah.
leveraging research. Is that your feeling as well?
Yeah, and having a lot of content and supply of content around research doesn't mean that also that people start doing it as well all over the sudden. But what I'm excited about is that it's so easy to start a business nowadays, that there's competition all over the industries. Like if you're selling anything, right? And eventually, um, because of that, there's going to be a lot of businesses that die because of that, because there's a lot of competition. And I strongly feel that a lot of businesses that will die because of that will be businesses that, haven't done the proper research, haven't understood the customers, haven't understood what they want, and haven't developed empathy towards them.
Makes sense. Um, let's talk about research methods. So and again, this is something I know nothing about, so I'm going to have to rely on you. But I would imagine there are many research methods. Um, what is your favorite one, and why do you like it so much?
Yeah, so there's one in particular. So let's break it down in two, because it really depends on like the goal. When it comes to like velocity, get the juiciest insights faster, I would say reviews mining for sure. Because first of all, it's public data. I don't have to pay anybody to get that data, or I can get that data instantly in a matter of an hour.
Even from brands, even from competitors, right?
Exactly. So that's when it comes to like velocity, definitely reviews mining, but also like velocity slash number of insights, right? Because there's a lot of people that write great reviews about the products and share a lot of stories and stuff like that. But so that's in terms of velocity. In terms of richness of, I don't even know if it's a word in English, when it comes to when it comes to insights, definitely interviews, right? Because you're having a conversation with a person one-to-one, and one of the things that I love doing just in life since I was little is asking questions. And one thing that I learned is that oftentimes when you mean something, somebody else might mean something else. So I'm a huge fan of like asking follow-up questions about what people mean. And oftentimes, just by asking that question, you uncover a lot of insights that, not other tools, not other research methods would give you that insight. So in terms of richness, and again, I don't mind. I've like a lot of ex-colleagues of mine in a lot of different companies that I worked at, they're like, dude, you're always asking a lot of questions. And I'm generally like a curious person. So I think it's also like it's good for me to like I'm generally good at asking questions just because I'm curious at it. So so interviews is definitely, on the top of it.
Just I want you to touch on this whole interview piece, because uh, do you, if you're actually doing the user interviews, are you doing it with like 10 interviews, or and also the other question is like, are you looking at a window period where you're saying like, I want to talk to people that have purchased the last like 3 months? And then my third part of this question is that, is the client sending them an email, sending out an email to people to recruit, or are you kind of managing that? Like how does it work?
Yeah, so in terms of like segments, like target of people to talk to, obviously it really depends on what the client's problem is. So if the client is like, okay, I need to increase conversion rate, then I focus on people that are just bought, also because there's still some reminding of what was going on in their decision-making process after they just purchased, rather than maybe they purchased 6 months ago. Oh my God, I can barely remember. What was the other thing that you asked?
I
Sorry.
want to know how many people you interview as well.
Yeah, I would say like 10, 15 people. I think it really depends on like, after interviewing 10 people, have I collected enough
Yeah.
information around it? Or, sometimes you talk to like somebody that doesn't share a lot of interesting insights because maybe, I don't know, they don't remember that much about that or for some other reason. So sometimes it might require a little bit more. But
And then
generally
how do
speaking,
you recruit these people? How do you send them an email? Does the client send an email?
yeah, so I would say two ways, very simple ways. One, you could simply have like a sort of like widget and pop up on the thank you page after somebody bought. Literally, like they just bought, you just say, hey, we're looking for somebody to help us get some feedback and interview. You can even like, incentivize them. Or the other alternative would be to, if the client has an email marketing automation tool, simply ask, send out like a trigger email after 30 minutes after the user bought, asking to have that conversation. And again, you could have incentivized, like oftentimes what you could do is send that survey, not survey, but that email asking to talk to one customers without incentivizing. And then if you don't get enough responses, you can ask them to.
Yeah, I personally like the idea of being able to recruit people without the incentive, because then it's just about the product and it's like, not the incentive. All right, Lorenzo. So I'm going to ask you another question. And this is something I'm personally really interested in understanding. I love counterintuitive, contrarian examples. So I want you to tell me, is there something counterintuitive or contrarian that you kind of got from a research project that you can share with us?
Yeah, so actually last year I worked with a client that sells meditation courses online. So it's an e-commerce company that sells meditation courses. And as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, Rishi, one of the things that I do when I start working with a client is I ask a bunch of questions to the client, right? And one of the questions that I always ask is, who's your competitors? Who are your competitors, right? And in this case, as it often happens, honestly, they give me a list of like, I think it was like 6 or 7 websites that were selling online meditation courses or yoga courses, right? And, I didn't really truly pay attention too much about it. Then one of the things that I did with this client, I actually interviewed 10 different people to understand their experience. And one of the insights that we had was within the I would say user segments that they had, there was a user segment of people that were basically like buying those courses because they had a lot of anxieties in the past. And a lot of those anxieties were around like COVID, were around the impact, not just from a health perspective, but from a financial perspective that COVID had on their lives. So for example, they either lost a job or their employees had to like lower their salary, or maybe there were entrepreneurs that had to lay off a bunch of people, or they had to kind of like declare bankruptcy. So a lot of anxieties around work, basically. And one of the questions that I asked was, okay, I understand that your problem was I have anxiety. I need to lower my anxieties as much as possible. So I wanted to understand what else they've tried in order to get that job done, to achieve that goal of lowering that anxiety as much as possible. And with a lot of like surprise that I had, most of the people said, well, they said, oh, I signed up to therapy. I started to work out more. I started to read more. Somebody even mentioned pet therapy, right? So with my surprise, I was expecting somebody to say, oh, I bought this other course from this other competitor. Didn't have to be a competitor that my client mentioned. But what I didn't expect was, well, we were trying to lower our anxiety without buying online courses around meditation, but we were trying to lower our anxieties with medications, with going to the therapy, with pet therapy, with music and stuff like that. And to me, it was very kind of like something that I didn't expect before going into the research mode.
And did it then change maybe the strategy, messaging?
Well, I didn't have a strategy before working with the client, because the strategy is dictated by the research. But because the client was shared with me that, oh yeah, here's the list of our competitors. So I looked at the list of competitors. I kind of like analyzed their website. I wanted to understand the messaging a little bit more, and then I realized that this client was not competing against those other people. Yeah, so it was very interesting.
That's great. I love that, because I think we sometimes are so literal in looking at competition that we define competition as people who are selling exactly what we're selling, and that we miss the fact that people are satisfying those needs through other means, like you said, pet therapy and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this client in particular was that these guys were buying meditation courses for the first time. So they hadn't really bought meditation courses before. So they were trying to solve that problem with that approach of meditation for the first time. So it wasn't like, I've tried other courses, but they didn't work for me. So I tried this one because I wanted to see maybe there was something different from a messaging standpoint that other online courses didn't have. No. It was a completely different perspective. And this was like a cohort of people within a lot of different people that they had, right?
I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really, really good point, because how your messaging is totally different, because their awareness level probably about meditation courses was super low because they tried different things. And so that affects your messaging. I love that. That's a great example.
And also, if you and I were to work with this client together, if you think about it, now we have two different challenges. One challenge is, okay, what do we do in order to increase conversion rate for the people that have never tried meditation before, like this cohort? And what are we going to do with the people that have tried meditations before? Maybe we even do research about what other meditation courses they've tried before, right? And now we have two different puzzles that we need to tackle, right?
Awesome. Yeah, no, I totally. That's a great example. And in our future talks, I want you to keep on collecting some contrarian examples so we can keep on sharing them. Because I think for me personally, it's the best way to learn is to just hear these kind of like surprising, unexpected examples. So thank you for that.
Sounds good.
All right, let's get to my final question, which is, and I kind of have an idea about this, but I'd love to get your perspective. Is research can be used for many, many things. I guess we think about it primarily in terms of conversions. I know you have a different take on this, but is it useful for just conversions, or is there more to it?
Definitely not just for conversions. I would say it's useful for any sort of like problem that the business is trying to solve. So I want to give you like few examples of how this, the research could be useful for. Let's say you're a subscription-based business, and that is subscription-based e-commerce, and you want to understand why people are churning from your subscription program. So you can use research to understand what was going on, what is the reason why a lot of people are canceling the subscription. Another example would be like, you want to understand more about what people what people think about the loyalty program that you have, right? You want to like improve it, make sure that people like the product that you're giving away in the loyalty program. You want to make sure that you understand to give away the loyalty awards based on certain different tiers and so on. Another example would be you want to develop new products and you want to understand from your own users what could be something that could be valuable to them based on whatever they're trying to achieve. So it really goes down to like, okay, what's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? What kind of problem you're trying to solve? And then, tailor the approach from the data you want to collect, but also like the different questions that you want to ask based on that.
Yeah, no, I can totally see this applying to a whole whole bunch of aspects.
I'm gonna give you another example. So I don't know if you are familiar with the show The Prophet. Have you heard about it?
I've heard about it. Yeah, CNBC or something, right?
Yeah. So basically, it's actually quite interesting. It's an entrepreneur that goes into failing businesses and basically like invest his own money in these failing businesses, and it rescues them, right? And what he does when he first comes into these businesses is he does research. He interviews the founders, he talks to customers, he looks at the data, he understands the P&L, and he applies the same methodology of research to basically like fix failing businesses. So that's enough. And this is nothing to do with like online businesses or conversion rate optimization. This is like, I'm talking about like pizza places or like car resellers offline or any sort of like offline business that you can think of. So it's not like research is not something that only online businesses should do. It's also like offline businesses. One day, hopefully, businesses that will be started on Mars, right? So
yeah,
online business.
Yeah, I like the show Bar Rescue. Same concept. So
when the wife of the guy, right, goes into the bar for the first time, right? That's research. She's doing the research for him. So he wants to understand her perspective on a bunch of issues that the bar has.
Exactly. No, this is great. This is great. In the interview, guys, Lorenzo talked about reviews mining, obviously. And the thing is that we have every episode that we've done, there is a section on reviews mining. So if you want to understand more about reviews mining for 10 websites that we've published so far, we have practical examples for you. Lorenzo, thank you very much for your time today. I want the people that are listening to add additional questions in the comment section. Lorenzo responds to them, obviously, and then we will, we'll just keep on interviewing him we'll do research on Lorenzo to understand his research process.
Actually, Rishi, let's do this. If people that are watching right now have any specific problem, any specific struggle, any specific sort of question around research or e-commerce or conversion rate optimization, and want our perspective, please add your question in the comments. If you don't want to add it in the comments, reach out to us on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Super happy to help you guys and answer that question for you.
Yep, that's awesome. No, that's exactly right. So thank you for your time, Lorenzo, today. And I will talk to you again soon for yet another episode. Ciao, guys.
Thanks, Rishi. Ciao, ciao.